What is the alternative though to rationality? Is it just kind of a Nietzschean will to power or something like that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the primary alternatives. There's the idea that you should go with your gut. There's wisdom in inarticulate first reactions. And this overlaps a bit with Nietzsche that what's important is not to think but to feel. I think it was Herder, the
Hmm.
German romantic, who said that. Or that there is no, and this it's tied to Nietzscheism, but it's kind of part of social justice warfare, wokeism, the successor ideology, as Wesley Yang put it, is that objective truth is an illusion. It's just a claim to power. There is a zero-sum competition among interest groups defined by race and sex, and argumentation should be to rectify the power imbalance where it's been the straight white males who've had all the power.
Is
And
there a way, I mean, can you use rationality to, to say, no, in fact, we can at least aspire to a disinterested understanding of the world, which will allow us to have a fairer and more just world? Or, I mean, when people say, well, you know what, like, talking about the Enlightenment, that's just a way to disguise your will to power and to make it, to make it complicated so it seems legitimate. But in
yeah, I
fact,
get that all the time, right?
yeah, I mean, so I
Well,
mean,
there,
in a way, I mean, these are kind of incommensurate arguments.
and in a way they are, that if you believe that argument itself is just a subterfuge, then you're not going to be open to any argument to change your mind. Nonetheless, I think there's a little chink, a little opening, which is, so are you willing to say that everything you just said now is irrational? Uh, and if so, why should I believe it? Why should I support you? Are there any reasons? And as soon as they say, well, yeah, there are reasons. Aha,
Yeah,
you believe in reason after all.
right.
Now, of course, human nature being what it is, people don't lay down their tribal commitments at the drop of a hat. But on the other hand, onlookers might be persuaded one way or another. New babies are being born every minute, and they've got to acquire a worldview. But I also just want to take it beyond the kind of the foundational answer, which is that as long as you're discussing reasons for anything, you're already committed to reason. Getting back to your question, why does reason and rationality matter? So that's one obvious kind of meta reason. Another is that, in fact, there are some data that suggest that people who are less susceptible to some of the classic fallacies, like the gambler's fallacy, the sunk cost fallacy, and so on, have better life outcomes. They're less likely to get sick, to miss a train, to get fired, to get divorced. There's getting back to the causes of progress. Progress being a demonstrable empirical fact, namely we live longer, we're richer, we're better educated, we're happier. How did that happen? Well, no thanks to the universe, where the laws of physics and biology try to grind us down. The only way that we can possibly carve out a better life for ourselves is by
Right.
applying reason, applying our brain power to make us better off.
Mhm.
And I suggest somewhat, maybe a bit tenuously, that the social movements that have succeeded and that should have succeeded often began with an argument. There was a John Locke, there was an Adam Smith, there was a Mary Astell, there was a Cesare Beccaria, who articulated why some practice of the day was inconsistent with other values that people held. And it would go viral in pamphlets, in a kind of samizdat of the day, be debated in pubs and salons and coffee houses, and eventually become the conventional wisdom.
Uh, yeah, and that's a fascinating section. And you talk about somebody like Frederick Douglass. There were also a number of early feminists who took, Lockean logic or the logic of the Declaration of Independence, and then used it to actually expand the rights of, expand the circle of who counted as human, who counted full rights. Um, do you think reason alone or rationality alone is compelling? Because, and I think about something like the abolitionist movement, there were absolute arguments which employed kind of religious reasoning that we are all equal before God, so no one should rule over one of us, saying that blacks are humans just as whites are. But then there was also famous images which seem to be more geared towards the emotion. So the famous image of the slave ship and the way that the slaves were actually put in the in the holds of ships, by all accounts, had a massive impact. So is reason one of the tools, or is it necessary? Is it sufficient? How do you, when you're trying to persuade people to a particular point of view or a vision of the good life?
No, it's a really good point, because we are humans. We're driven not just by abstract principles of human rights and human equality, but by empathy, by horror, by disgust, by compassion, which and those are emotions, and an effective persuader knows how to use both. And Frederick Douglass being a fine example.
Yeah.
He had just a lightning sharp mind, and he kept saying, "I'm not going to argue why slavery is evil." Then he proved 17 arguments.
Yeah.
And he also appealed to heart-wrenching images of the suffering of slaves. Yeah.
This sounds like a good place to ask you. I want to ask you two questions here to explain one thing. You in the book you mentioned in passing the famous Hume line about how reason is and always should be a slave to the passions. Can you explain what he's actually getting there? Because sometimes I think that leaves people wondering what the hell to think about.
That's right. It's easy to misinterpret him as saying that we should just shoot from the hip, reason by the seat of our pants, succumb to temptations of the moment. But he, of all people, was not saying that. I think ultimately it's just a logical point that reason is in service of a goal, and it can't tell you what that goal should be. And the goal in practice in humans is provided by the passions, by the emotions. We deploy our reason to attain something that we want, and who's to say what we want? Those are passions.
So does that, I mean, does it get us that far from a kind of medieval conception of man as a, an angel trapped in the body of a beast?
Yeah. Well, it is, and I did appeal to an angelic metaphor in my book on the decline of violence, the better angels of our nature. And I do think, as someone who's an advocate both of the idea that there is such a thing as human nature, and as an advocate of the belief that progress is possible. So you can't just say, oh, you can't change human nature, we're stuck with war because it's in our genes. I don't believe that. Just because the mind does have multiple systems, multiple components, multiple modules, if you want. And there's always tension between various desires, various better angels, and it's by kind of mobilizing and empowering our better angels, so to speak, that progress is possible. So there is something in the medieval notion, yeah.
I want to ask you about Rebel Without a Cause. I think it's a 1954 movie or 1955, but right around the time you were born. It's obviously a famous movie starring James Dean. You use that to illustrate a couple of points, but can you talk about how the chicken run, where the two characters are going to drive cars straight at each other? How does that illustrate rationality for you? Yeah. And then also, I mean, why do you love that movie so much?
Right. In fact, in the movie, I had to remind myself they didn't actually approach each other. The chicken there was driving over a cliff.
Right.
But the idea is that let's take the simpler case of the two cars approaching each other at high speed, each driven by a teenager. The first to swerve is the chicken. He loses space, he loses. Yeah. It's an illustration of a game theory paradox in which often the optimal strategy in situations of conflict is to be less rational, less in control. In this case, how do you win at chicken? Well, you put a U-lock on the steering wheel, you put a brick on the accelerator, you climb into the back seat. The other guy has no choice but to swerve. So the guy who visibly sacrifices control is the one who wins. Now, of course, the problem is if both teenagers hit on the strategy at the same time, it could be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, we are talking about teenagers, so the likelihood of that is probably higher than it is among people of more mature age.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, in situations where the winner is the less rational one. What's the higher level rationality is don't play games like that, or
Right.
don't deal with the hothead, the the high maintenance partner, the unreasonable person, because they are going to win, and so find someone else to negotiate with.
Can I ask about one of the reasons I bring up with Rebel Without a Cause is that that also kind of created a different sensibility among a lot of American, I guess global or North American teenagers. Is and it created a sense of what it was to be an adolescent. People ape James Dean. I mean, they're still doing it in various ways. Is it conceivable that for something like Rationality, that if you have maybe artistic works or large movements that suddenly make it cool to be rational, is that a way of kind of changing the grounds upon which we stand? Because your argument is that it's better to have more rational actors in a society than fewer. Is that one of the ways to kind of build out the volume and the quality of rationality in society?
Yeah, could you have a rational James Dean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a tall order. I mean, it's hard to
Yeah.
engineer any kind of grassroots cultural change from the top
But
down.
I mean, it kind of comes and goes in streaks, right? Where
It does, yeah.
in the Enlightenment, certainly there were movements where it was kind of it was cool, although maybe not at the time, but looking backwards, we categorize it as the certain salons, certain
Yeah.
areas of Paris and Edinburgh and whatnot.
Yeah, and that there is a kind of Silicon Valley rationality community, Bay Area that kind of tries to do that. I don't know if they succeed in breaking out of the nerd stereotype.
Right.
But the thing to capitalize on probably is not how cool it is to be rational, but maybe how uncool it is to be irrational, to be caught in making an obvious blunder. So it might have to come from that side.